My son thought I was nothing but a broke old man he'd threatened with a nursing home. Then a black car pulled up. A man in a $10,000 suit shook my hand like an equal, and he realized the father he'd pitied his entire life had been someone else all along, someone dangerous, someone powerful, someone who'd been hiding in plain sight for 30 years. This is the story of the day everything he believed shattered. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments section where you're watching from so I'll know how far my story has gone. The clock stopped working in November of 2022. Heart attack, the repairman said, if clocks could have such things. A seized gear, corrosion in the mechanism, not worth fixing. But I still hear a ticking. Tick, tick, tick. Every morning at 6:47 a.m., when the house is coldest and the silence weighs heaviest. That's when the phantom rhythm starts, counting down something I can't name. Maybe time I don't have left. Maybe chances I've already lost. I sat in my chair, the leather one by the window, the one that's molded to my shape after 15 years, and watched the rain streak down the glass. Portland rain. The kind that doesn't announce itself with thunder, just settles in like an unwanted guest and refuses to leave. Jacob's car pulled into the driveway at 9:15 a.m. I knew why he'd come. We'd been dancing around this conversation for months, ever since I'd missed 2 mortgage payments. Except I hadn't actually missed them. I'd just let him think I had. The front door opened without a knock. His house now, in his mind. Dad. One word, flat as a tombstone. I didn't turn around, just watched his reflection in the rain-blurred window, a ghost of the boy who used to run to me when thunderstorms scared him. Jacob. He moved into the kitchen, Emily trailing like an apology. I heard the scrape of a chair, the clearing of his throat, that particular silence that comes before people say things they've rehearsed. We need to talk about your situation. Your situation, as if poverty were a medical condition, as if aging were a personal failure. I folded the newspaper slowly, precisely. The Oregonian, Friday edition, obituaries on page B6. I'd counted 4 names I'd recognized. Men my age. Men who'd also become invisible. I'm listening, I said. Jacob exhaled hard, frustrated already. You can't keep living like this. The bills, the house, your health. Dad, you're 72. You need structure, support. Tick, tick, tick. What I need, I said quietly, is being discussed without me, apparently. Emily flinched. Jacob's jaw tightened. Don't make this harder than it is. I've looked into some places, good facilities, staffed care. You'd have your own room, activities, people your age. A nursing home. An assisted living community. Same cage, prettier bars. I stood slowly, feeling the old shrapnel wound in my left thigh pull tight. 49 years since Laos, and it still remembered. Some things don't heal. They just learn to stay quiet. Jacob stood too, arms crossed, defensive, righteous. Work or nursing home, Dad? Pick one. He said it coldly, clinically, like a doctor delivering a terminal diagnosis. Behind him, Emily studied her shoes. She'd always been kind, but kindness doesn't stop a train once it's moving. I looked at my son, really looked at him. 28 years old, software engineer, two-bedroom condo in Beaverton, opinions on things he'd never seen. He thought he knew the world because he'd read about it on screens. He thought he knew me. And that's when I smiled. Not bitterness, not surrender. Something else. Something that came from a place he'd never been, from a version of his father that had been buried under decades of suburban camouflage. "I understand," I said. Jacob blinked, thrown by the lack of fight. What he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that in exactly 17 minutes, everything would change. The clock that didn't work kept ticking in my head. Tick, 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 counting down to the truth.
Margaret died on a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were her garden days. She'd spend hours with her roses, talking to them like old friends. When the hospice nurse called time of death at 4:32 p.m., there was dirt still under her fingernails. Jacob cried at the funeral. So did Emily. I stood dry-eyed by the grave at Willamette National, watching them lower the woman I'd loved for 43 years into Oregon soil, and felt nothing. Not because I didn't care, but because I'd learned long ago how to turn feeling off, how to function when everything inside you is screaming. They teach you that, the people I used to work for. They teach you to compartmentalize, to survive. I just forgot how to turn it back on. The first year after Margaret passed, Jacob called every Sunday, checked in, asked if I needed anything. I always said no, because what I needed wasn't something he could give me. What I needed was buried at Willamette National with dirt under her fingernails. By the second year, the calls became biweekly, then monthly. By the third year, they only came when he needed something from me, or when he was worried I'd become something he'd have to deal with. I watched him pull away like a boat leaving dock, and I didn't throw a rope. Maybe I should have. Maybe I was already too far gone into the quiet. The house grew dusty. Meals became optional. Some days I'd sit in Margaret's garden and realize hours had passed and I hadn't moved. Just sat there, listening to the phantom clock tick. Jacob noticed the decline. He just didn't notice the contradictions. Like how the mortgage, 3 months behind, according to the notices I left visible on the counter, suddenly cleared, paid in full. Bank said it was a wire transfer from a corporate account in Zurich. Jacob assumed it was life insurance he didn't know about. It wasn't. Or how Lily's tuition at Lincoln Academy, $12,000 a year, 3rd grade, the kind of school software engineers pretend they can afford, kept getting paid despite him being stretched thin. He thought Emily's parents were helping. They weren't. Or how the medical bills for Margaret's final year, the experimental treatments, the hospice care, the medications insurance wouldn't cover, all $73,000 of them, vanished from collections. Jacob assumed they'd been forgiven due to hardship. They hadn't been. Someone was paying. Someone with access to accounts that didn't appear on any tax return. Someone who'd made certain promises a long time ago, in rooms that didn't officially exist, to people whose names were still classified. The money came through channels Jacob would never understand, routing numbers that traced to consulting firms in Brussels and Singapore, pension funds from agencies that didn't acknowledge my existence, compensation for services the government would never admit happened. I wasn't broke. I was invisible. There's a difference. But I let Jacob believe I was failing. Let him see the old man in the dusty house with the stopped clock. Let him think his father had become irrelevant. Because the alternative, telling him the truth, meant telling him about Laos, about Tehran, about the embassy in Manila, and the 23 people I'd carried out through sewer tunnels while the building burned above us. It meant telling him his father had been a ghost. And ghosts don't get to be normal. I'd spent 30 years trying to be normal for Margaret. For him. Turns out I wasn't very good at it.
The door closed behind them with the sound like a gunshot muffled by a pillow. Soft, final. I stood in the kitchen long after Jacob's Prius disappeared down Maple Street, watching the space where he'd been. The chair he'd sat in was still slightly angled away from the table. Emily's untouched glass of water left a ring on the wood. 2 weeks. The words hung in the air like smoke after a fire. I walked to the counter, poured myself what was left of the morning coffee, cold now, bitter, the kind of mistake you'd drink anyway because wasting it feels worse than suffering through it. The Mr. Coffee machine wheezed and dripped, a death rattle it had been making for 6 months. Margaret always said we should replace it. We never did. The house settled around me with its familiar creaks, water pipes knocking somewhere in the walls like Morse code from a sinking ship, the refrigerator humming its off-key solo. Outside, Mrs. Chen from next door was mowing her lawn. Friday morning ritual, rain or shine. The smell of cut grass drifted through the window screen, mixing with old coffee and the faint lavender sachets Margaret had tucked into every drawer before she died. The house remembered her better than I did some days. I sat back in my chair and looked at the pile of mail on the side table. Bills I didn't need to pay but left unopened for appearance. Grocery store circulars. A letter from the VA about benefits I'd never claimed, because claiming them meant questions I couldn't answer. 2 weeks to find a job, at 72, with a limp and nightmares and gaps in my resume the size of decades. Jacob didn't understand. How could he? He didn't know that when he was 6 and asked why Daddy traveled so much, I'd lied and said consulting. He didn't know that the scar on my shoulder, the one I told him came from a car accident, actually came from a knife fight in a Bogota alley while extracting an asset who knew where the cartel kept their American hostages. He didn't know that the year I missed his 8th birthday, I wasn't at a conference in Denver. I was in a room in Tehran with a man who sold nuclear blueprints to the highest bidder, convincing him that cooperating was better than the alternative. I chose the job over the birthday party, over the soccer games, over the school plays where he was a tree in the back row. I chose it because someone had to, because if I didn't, other fathers wouldn't make it home to their sons at all. But Jacob just knew I wasn't there, and now he was returning the favor. I set the coffee mug down and checked my watch, an old Seiko, the kind they stopped making in the 90s. Still kept perfect time. 9:47 a.m. In approximately 13 minutes, Director Ashford's car would turn onto my street. I whispered it out loud, just to hear how it sounded in the empty house. 2 weeks. Like a mission timer. Like a countdown to exfiltration. Like the distance between who I'd been and who I'd pretended to be was finally collapsing. Tick, tick, tick. The clock that didn't work kept counting down anyway.
The sound reached me before the sight. A low purr, not the high whine of the Hondas and Toyotas that populated our neighborhood, not the electric silence of the Teslas the younger couples drove. This was something else. Something that cost more than most people's yearly salary and announced itself without apology. I didn't move from my chair. Through the rain-streaked window, I watched the Lincoln Continental roll to a stop at my curb. Black. Not the cheap black of rental cars, but the kind of black that absorbed light, the kind of black that said, "We don't want to be seen, but if you see us, you'll remember." The engine cut. Silence rushed back in, heavier than before. My heart, the one the VA doctor said had minor arrhythmia and nothing to worry about, kicked against my ribs like it remembered things my mind had filed away. The driver's door opened. Director William Ashford stepped out into the Portland drizzle like he was stepping onto a stage. 70 years old, silver hair combed back, charcoal suit that probably cost more than Jacob's monthly mortgage. He didn't hurry, didn't look around nervously. Men like Ashford didn't hurry. The world waited for them. He'd aged since I had last seen him. That was 8 years ago at Margaret's funeral. He'd stood in the back, hadn't approached, hadn't signed the guest book, just stood there for 20 minutes, then left. A ghost paying respects to a ghost's wife. Now he was at my door. I stood slowly, feeling my spine crack and realign. The shrapnel wound in my thigh complained. I ignored it. Some conversations required standing. The knock came. 3 times. Precise. Not the frantic pounding of solicitors or the apologetic tap of neighbors. This was the knock of someone who knew you were home and knew you'd answer. I opened the door. Harrison. His voice hadn't changed. Still carried that quiet authority, the kind you couldn't teach or fake, the kind that came from making decisions that altered the course of nations and sleeping soundly afterwards. Bill. We didn't shake hands. Not yet. There was protocol to this, a dance we both knew. May I come in? I stepped aside. He entered like he'd been here before, though he hadn't. His eyes swept the room, cataloging, assessing, the way we'd been trained to read environments in under 3 seconds. He saw the stopped clock, the old furniture, the dust I hadn't bothered to clean, the careful performance of decline. His expression didn't change, but I saw the flicker of understanding in his eyes. Still playing the role, that look said, even now. Coffee? I offered. No time. That's when I heard it. The second car, the Prius, pulling back into my driveway. Jacob. Through the window, I watched him get out, confused. He must have left his phone or Emily's purse or some forgotten thing that required returning. But now he was frozen, staring at the Lincoln like it was a spaceship. Ashford noticed. Of course he noticed. Your son? Yes. He doesn't know? No. Ashford nodded slowly. Then he turned to face me fully, and his expression shifted. The social mask dropped away. What remained was the man I'd known for 40 years, the man who'd sent me into rooms where one wrong word meant death, the man who'd pulled me out of Tehran when the embassy burned, the man who'd signed the papers that made Harrison Whitmore officially retire while keeping him unofficially active. Harrison, he said, and his voice carried the weight of decades. We need you. Behind him, through the window, I watched Jacob climb my porch steps. His hand was already reaching for the doorknob when Ashford spoke again. Moscow's asking questions about 79. You're the only one left who knows the answers. The door opened. Jacob froze, and I watched my son's face as his entire understanding of reality began to crack.
There are 3 kinds of people in the world. Those who make history, those who record it, and those who erase it. I was the 3rd kind. Laos, 1976. The official record says the war ended in 75. The official record is a lie. I was 23 years old, barely shaving, when they pulled me out of Army intelligence and put me on a plane with no flight plan, no uniform, no dog tags, just a name that wasn't mine and coordinates to a village that didn't exist on any map. Project Kingfisher, code name for an operation that never happened. We were extracting a Hmong translator who'd worked with CIA operatives during the secret war. The problem was the Pathet Lao wanted him dead, and the new communist government wanted him tried as a traitor. We went in with 3 men.
came out with 2.5. Johnson caught shrapnel from a grenade that was supposed to kill us all. He lived. Barely. The translator made it to Bangkok, then disappeared into a relocation program. 20 years later, his intel helped break a heroin trafficking network that stretched from the Golden Triangle to Seattle. No medals, no commendations, just a redacted file in a basement at Langley labeled Operation Classified Level 5. Tehran, 1979. The hostage crisis everyone remembers started in November. What they don't remember, what they were never told, is that in September, 2 months before the embassy fell, we knew it was coming. I was 32, already had the limp, already had the nightmares. They sent me in as an agricultural consultant, which was agency speak for spy with a briefcase. My job was simple: identify which Iranian military officers were still loyal to American interests, get them out before the revolution turned them into corpses. I got 7 out. Could have been 12, but 5 refused to leave, said they'd rather die as patriots than live as exiles. 3 of them were executed in January 1980, hung from construction cranes in public squares. The other 2 just disappeared. The officer I saved, codename Cardinal, later provided the intelligence that located the hostages during the failed rescue attempt. He couldn't stop the failure, but he kept 23 people alive long enough for diplomacy to work. His real name is still classified. So am I from that operation. The file just says, Asset Exfiltration, Phoenix Protocol. Bogota, 1991. By then I was 43. Margaret thought I was consulting for the State Department. Jacob was 18, headed to college. I was supposed to be aging out, taking a desk job, letting younger men do the field work. Then the Medellin cartel kidnapped 3 American journalists. The official position was no negotiation with terrorists. The unofficial position was get them back alive or don't come back at all. I went in as a relief worker, spent 6 weeks in the slums building relationships, greasing palms, following breadcrumbs that led to a compound outside the city. The extraction took 47 minutes. We lost 1 hostage, got shot in the crossfire trying to run. The other 2 made it out. One of them won a Pulitzer Prize 3 years later for her reporting on human trafficking. She never knew who pulled her out of that room. The after-action report was incinerated. The mission was folded into a larger operation and buried under layers of bureaucratic paper. All that remained was a single line in my service record: hostile retrieval, sovereign authorization. These weren't my only ghosts, just the ones I could still name. There were others: asset recruitments in Manila, a defection in East Berlin, a weapons cache in Beirut that we burned before it reached Hezbollah. Missions that bled together after 30 years, faces I'd saved and faces I had sacrificed, all filed away in rooms that required 3 security clearances just to enter. And now, sitting across from Director Ashford in my kitchen, watching Jacob hover in the doorway with his world collapsing, I understood why he'd come. Ashford reached into his jacket and pulled out a single sheet of paper. No letterhead, no signature, just a string of alphanumeric code and 3 words at the bottom. He slid it across the table. The Moscow Directive. I stared at it, felt the old ice creep back into my veins. I said quietly, "That's impossible. We burned that in '84. Someone dug it up."
Jacob didn't move from the doorway, just stood there, pale, gripping his car keys like they were the only solid thing left in a world that had suddenly gone liquid. Ashford folded the paper back into his jacket, stood, extended his hand to me, a handshake this time, the kind exchanged between equals, between men who'd walked through fire together. "I'll be in touch within the hour," he said. "Secure a line." I nodded. He walked past Jacob without a glance, the way you'd pass a lamppost or a mailbox. Not cruel, just indifferent. To Ashford, Jacob was civilian, uncleared, irrelevant to the conversation that mattered. The door closed. Silence crashed back in. Jacob stared at me, through me, like he was trying to recognize a stranger wearing his father's face. "Who was that?" His voice came out strangled. "An old colleague." "Colleague from what?" I moved to the sink, rinsed my coffee mug, bought myself 3 seconds. Old habit. Never answer immediately. Let them fill the silence with their own assumptions. Most people tell you what they think before you have to lie. "From work," I said finally. "You don't work. You haven't worked in 15 years. That's why we're here, Dad. That's why—" He stopped. Reset. "That was a government car. A federal government car." "Was it?" "Don't patronize me." I turned to face him. Saw the boy I'd taught to ride a bike, the teenager I'd failed to reach, the man I barely knew. All 3 versions staring at me with the same question burning behind their eyes. "Who are you?" "Jacob," I said carefully, "there are things about my past that are complicated." "Complicated," he laughed, sharp, bitter. "Complicated like you forgot to mention you were secretly rich? Complicated like someone who drives a car worth more than my house shows up and treats you like... He couldn't find the words. "Like what?" I asked quietly. "Like you matter." And there it was. The wound underneath the anger. Not confusion, not betrayal, jealousy. Because his father, the broke old man he'd threatened with a nursing home 20 minutes ago, had just been treated with more respect than Jacob had ever seen anyone show me. I do matter. To some people. For some things. What things? Things I can't discuss. Can't or won't. Both. His jaw tightened. The keys bit into his palm. "I'm your son. I have a right to know who you are." "You know who I am. I'm the man who raised you, who paid for your college, who—" "With what money?" He stepped closer. "You're broke, Dad. You can't make mortgage payments. You can't afford groceries. That's what you told me. But that man, that car, none of this makes sense unless you've been lying." I could have told him then. Could have laid it all out. Laos, Tehran, Bogota, the Moscow Directive, 40 years of classified service that bought him a childhood safe enough to take for granted. But what would that accomplish? Pride? Absolution? Or just more questions I couldn't answer? "Everything you have," I said slowly, "exists because of what I've done. The house you grew up in, the school you went to, your daughter's tuition, your mother's medical care, all of it." "I don't understand." "I know." "Then help me understand." "I can't." He stood there, shaking. Not with fear, with frustration, with 30 years of distance, finally demanding an explanation it would never receive. 2 weeks, he said, finally, voice hollow. "You've got 2 weeks. Then he turned and left. This time, he didn't come back. I watched his car disappear down Maple Street, watched Mrs. Chen finish her lawn and go inside, watched the rain pick up again, hammering the windows like it was trying to break through. Upstairs, in the attic, there was a footlocker. Green, military issue. Lock that hadn't been opened since Margaret died. Inside were medals I'd never worn, commendations I'd never framed, photographs of men whose faces were still classified, and a passport with my face and someone else's name. By midnight, Jacob would find it. And then he'd really start asking questions.
I didn't witness what happened next, but Emily told me later, after everything fell apart and came back together in a shape none of us recognized. She said Jacob didn't come home that night, just drove in circles for 2 hours, then showed up at my house at 11:47 p.m. Used his old key, the one I'd never asked him to return. I was already asleep, or pretending to be. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. She said he went straight to the attic. The footlocker sat where it had always sat, beneath the eaves, covered in a tarp and 30 years of dust. Margaret used to ask what was in it. I told her mementos from before we met. She never pushed. Jacob pulled off the tarp. The lock was a combination I'd set in 1994 and never changed. 3 numbers, Margaret's birthday. It took him 6 tries. When the lid opened, Emily said, he just stared. Didn't touch anything at first, just looked. 3 medals, never mounted. Silver star, bronze star, purple heart. No accompanying certificates, just the ribbons and medal wrapped in cloth that smelled like gun oil and time. A stack of letters coded, handwritten on paper so thin it was almost transparent. Postmarks from cities that didn't match the return addresses: Manila, Brussels, Istanbul. None addressed to Harrison Whitmore, different names on every envelope. 4 passports, his father's face, younger, harder, 4 different names, stamps from countries he'd claimed never to have visited. And at the bottom, wrapped in a shoulder holster worn soft with use, a Beretta 92FS, well-maintained, loaded. Emily said he lifted it like it might bite him. "Jacob," she whispered from the attic stairs, "this is." He didn't answer, just kept staring at the gun in his hands, the weight of it, the reality of it. This wasn't a consultant's tool. This was a weapon carried by someone who expected to use it. He wasn't a failure, Jacob said finally, hollow. He was something else, something we don't have a word for. Emily came closer, knelt beside him, picked up one of the medals. Silver Star, she read off the inscription, for gallantry in action against an enemy of the United States. She looked up. "Jacob, your father was a hero." "No," Jacob shook his head, anger creeping back in. "Heroes get parades. They get recognition. They don't let their kids think they're nothing. They don't fake being broke. They don't lie for 30 years. Maybe he couldn't tell the truth. There's always a choice. Is there? They sat in silence, surrounded by the evidence of a life Jacob had never known, a father who'd been erased from record, a ghost who'd chosen invisibility over glory. He missed everything, Jacob said quietly. My birthdays, my games, graduation. Said he was working, said it was important. And I thought he was just avoiding us, avoiding me. Maybe he was protecting you. From what? Emily picked up one of the letters, held it to the dim attic light. From whatever required this. That's when Jacob's phone rang. Unknown number, 2:14 a.m. He almost didn't answer, but something, instinct, curiosity, fear, made him pick up. Jacob Whitmore? A woman's voice, calm, professional, the kind of calm that exists on the other side of panic. Who is this? Someone who worked with your father. Listen carefully. Director Ashford is coming for him tomorrow. If you love your father, if you want him to live, don't let him leave. What do you... The Moscow directive isn't a consultation. It's a burial. They're tying up loose ends. Your father is a loose end. I don't understand. You don't need to. Just keep him home, keep him safe. And Jacob? What? Everything he did for you. Remember that when this is over. The line went dead. Jacob sat in the attic, surrounded by medals and lies, holding a gun that still smelled like the kind of work his father had never talked about. And for the first time in 30 years, he understood nothing at all.
The coffee shop Ashford chose was the kind that doubled as a used bookstore. Dim lighting, worn couches, the smell of espresso and old paper. A place where conversations disappeared into ambient noise and nobody looked twice at two old men talking in the corner. He was already there when I arrived at 7 a.m., sitting with his back to the wall. Old habits. I took the chair opposite, also with my back protected. Older habits. "You look tired," he said. "I'm 72. "You look tired at 40. Fair point. A barista brought coffee without being asked. Ashford must have ordered for both of us. Black, no sugar. He still remembered. "The Moscow directive," I said, keeping my voice low. "I thought we incinerated everything in '84, after Budapest." "We did." Ashford wrapped his hands around his mug. They shook slightly. Early-stage Parkinson's, maybe. Or just age catching up to a man who'd carried too much weight for too long. "Someone rebuilt it from memory." "Whose memory?" "That's the question." He slid a photograph across the table. Black and white, surveillance quality. A man, mid-60s, gray beard, sitting at an outdoor cafe in what looked like Prague. I didn't recognize him, but I recognized the pin on his lapel. Small, brass, a double-headed eagle, the kind worn by certain members of Soviet foreign intelligence. Old school, KGB vintage. "Codename Architect," Ashford said. "We think he was the mole who compromised the Moscow directive in '79. We thought he died in 1991 during the Soviet collapse. Turns out, he just retired." "And now?" "Now he's selling memoirs to the Chinese. Detailed accounts of joint CIA MI6 operations from '76 to '92, with complete names, dates, and operational methodologies that are still in use." I felt the cold settle into my chest. The same cold I'd felt in Tehran when I realized half the people on our extraction list had already been arrested. The cold that meant someone had talked who shouldn't have. "The directive had 12 active operations," I said slowly. "Kingfisher, Phoenix, Sovereign, if he knows them all." "He does." "Then he knows the assets, the networks, everything. Everything you built, Harrison. You were the architect's architect. You ran 7 of those 12 operations. The other 5 all branched from intelligence you provided." Ashford leaned forward. "He can't verify the details without someone who was there, someone who remembers the ground truth." "And you think I can identify inconsistencies, figure out what he actually knows versus what he's bluffing?" "Yes. By going through my own operations, reliving every extraction, every dead drop, every asset I recruited who might still be out there?" "Yes." I took a sip of coffee. It was good, too good for what we were discussing. "What's the real job, Bill?" His eyes flickered. Just for a second, but I'd known him 40 years. I knew what that flicker meant. "What do you mean?" "You didn't drive 2 hours to ask me to review old files. You've got analysts for that.
You've got AI systems that can cross-reference operational data faster than I can remember my own name. I set the mug down. So what's the real reason you need me? Ashford was quiet for a long moment. Outside, Portland woke up slowly. Cars passing, people rushing to jobs that mattered in ways they'd never question. Architect won't meet with analysts. He won't meet with current officers. He's paranoid, thinks everyone under 50 is compromised by technology, by surveillance, by loyalties he doesn't understand. So he'll only meet with someone from his era, someone who worked the same streets, spoke the same language, someone he considers... Ashford paused, choosing his words carefully. And equal. And there it was. You want me to meet him. I want you to verify him. Get close, confirm what he knows, and if necessary, neutralize him. Ashford didn't confirm, didn't deny, just held my gaze. I should have said no, should have walked away. I'd earned that. 30 years of service buried in redacted files, a wife I'd lost, a son who looked at me like I was a stranger. But there were names in those operations, people I'd recruited, people who trusted me with their lives, assets who disappeared into quiet retirements in Kansas and Oregon and Vermont, living under new names, with grandchildren who'd never know what their grandparents had sacrificed. If Archipet talked, those people died. When do we leave? I asked. Ashford exhaled. Relief, maybe, or regret. Tomorrow night.
I felt him before I saw him. Call it instinct. Call it 40 years of knowing when someone's eyes are on you. Call it the particular weight of being watched by someone who loves you but no longer trusts you. Jacob was following me. It was 8:30 p.m., 24 hours after my meeting with Ashford. I was at a secure facility in Hillsborough. The kind of building that looks like a tech startup from the outside, but requires 3 biometric scans to get past the lobby. Ashford had given me access, temporary credentials, a workstation in a room with no windows and walls that probably cost more per square foot than most houses. I was reviewing operational files, cross-referencing names and dates from the Moscow directive, trying to identify which assets Architect might actually know versus which ones he was fabricating. The terminal required a password and a retinal scan. When the system prompted for language preference, I selected Russian, because half the files were written in Cyrillic, and reading translations wastes time. I didn't think anyone was watching, but through the reflection in the dark monitor, I caught movement, a shadow at the observation window, the window that was supposed to be one-way glass, but apparently wasn't dark enough if you knew where to look. Jacob. He must have followed me from the house, parked down the street, watched me enter, maybe sweet-talked or bribed his way into the building. Software engineers have friends in tech companies, and this place was officially listed as a data security firm. I kept typing, kept my face neutral, let him watch. On screen, asset reports from Tehran, 1979. Code names, exfiltration routes, safe houses that didn't exist on any map. I scrolled through them, my fingers moving across the Cyrillic keyboard without hesitation, translating in my head faster than any software could manage. Кардинал подтвердил местоположение. Cardinal confirmed location. Third Heiss House, September 14th. I typed a search query, also in Russian because that's how the files were indexed, and switching languages would take longer. Through the glass, I heard it. Faint.
A sharp intake of breath. Jacob had just watched his father, the man who claimed he picked up a little Russian in college, type fluently in a language he supposedly barely knew, accessing files that required clearance levels most people didn't know existed. I gave him 5 more minutes, let him see me pull up photographs, faces of people from operations he'd never heard of. Let him see me cross-reference dates with handwritten notes I'd made 30 years ago, notes that Ashford had somehow retrieved from archives that were supposed to be destroyed. Then I stood, closed the terminal, logged out. I didn't look toward the window, just grabbed my coat and walked to the exit. But as I passed through the corridor, I caught Ashford's voice coming from an office. The door was cracked. He was on the phone. I shouldn't have stopped, shouldn't have listened, but something in his tone made me pause. "Harrison doesn't know the extraction is one way," Ashford was saying, voice low, careful. "Once he confirms architect's intel, we can't risk him coming back. Too much exposure, too many questions." Silence. Someone responding on the other end. "I understand the optics, but he's 72, retired, no family that would make noise. His son barely speaks to him. If he disappears in Prague, it's just an old man who traveled and didn't come back." My blood went cold. "We're not terminating him," Ashford said quickly. "Just relocating, indefinitely. Secure facility, comfortable. He'll understand eventually. It's for everyone's safety." Another pause. "Yes, including his." I stepped back from the door, moved silently down the hallway, muscle memory taking over, exit routes, escape protocols. The training never leaves you. Behind me, I heard a door open. Not Ashford's office. The observation room. Jacob stepped out into the corridor, pale, shaking, staring at me like a ghost that had just materialized in front of me. "Dad, what the hell is happening?" And for the first time in 30 years, I didn't have a lie prepared. "Get in the car," I said quietly. "We need to leave, now." "Why?" "Because the people I used to work for just decided I know too much." His eyes went wide. "The man at the house is trying to bury me." "Then we call the police. Jacob." I grabbed his arm. Gentle, but firm. "The police can't help with this. Neither can lawyers. Neither can anyone you know. Do you understand?" He looked at me. Really looked at me. And I saw it finally click. His father wasn't just a consultant. His father was a target. "We need to go," I said again. This time, he didn't argue. Behind us, somewhere in the building, I heard Ashford's door open. We ran.
We drove east on Highway 26, past the suburban sprawl, into the dark farmland where Portland's lights couldn't reach. Jacob didn't ask where we were going, just gripped the steering wheel and drove. I directed him to an old airstrip outside Sandy, private. Abandoned since the 90s when the owner died and his kids moved to California. The hangar doors hung crooked on rusted hinges. Weeds pushed through the cracked tarmac. Perfect place for a conversation that needed to stay off record. Jacob killed the engine. For a long moment, neither of us moved, just sat there in the darkness, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. "Inside," I said finally. The hangar smelled like oil and rot, and 40 years of weather seeping through holes in the roof. Moonlight sliced through the gaps, painting stripes across the concrete floor. An old Cessna sat in the corner, tires flat, covered in dust, thick as snow. Jacob stopped in the middle of the space. Turned. And the look on his face, I'd seen it before. On assets who just realized they'd been lied to. On allies who discovered the mission wasn't what they'd been told. Betrayal. Anger. Fear. "Talk," he said. "What do you want to know?"
Everything. His voice cracked. I want to know who you are, who you've been, why that man, Ashford, why he's trying to make you disappear. I want to know why you speak Russian, why you have medals in a box, why strangers call me in the middle of the night warning me that my father is a loose end. I leaned against the Cessna's wing, felt the cold metal through my jacket. You want the truth? I deserve the truth. No, I said quietly. You deserve a father who was there, who didn't miss birthdays and soccer games, who didn't lie about business trips. You deserved better than what I gave you. But the truth isn't something anyone deserves. It's just something you survive. Stop talking in riddles. I'm not. I met his eyes. I'm trying to protect you, same as I've always done. By lying? By keeping you separate from the things that would destroy you if you knew? Jacob laughed, bitter, broken. You don't get to decide that. You don't get to decide what I can handle. I'm your father. That's exactly what I get to decide. No, he stepped closer, hands shaking. You're a stranger who wore my father's face, who sat at our dinner table and pretended to be normal while you were, what, a spy? An assassin? A patriot. The word came out harder than I intended. I was a man who did what his country asked because someone had to. I went places you've never heard of. I stopped things you'll never know happened. I saved people who will never know my name. And yes, I lied. To you, to your mother, to everyone, because that was the job. The job. He shook his head. You chose the job over us. I chose the job for you. Bullshit. Is it? My voice rose, decades of restraint cracking. Every operation I ran, every asset I extracted, every network I built was so people like you could grow up safe, could go to college and get married and have kids and never once worry about whether a foreign agent was going to put a bullet in their head because their father knew too much. Then why is someone trying to bury you now? The question hung in the cold air. Because I know things people want forgotten, I said finally. And because men like Ashford tie up loose ends. That's what we do. What we've always done. We? Jacob's voice dropped. You're one of them. I was. And now? Now I'm the thing they're afraid of. A memory that won't die. A file that won't stay closed. Jacob turned away, ran his hands through his hair. When he spoke again, his voice was small, young. The voice of the boy who'd asked me once why I traveled so much. Why didn't you just tell me? Would you have believed me? I don't know. Exactly. I pushed off the wing, limped toward him. If I tell you everything, if I give you every operation, every name, every mission, you'll never forgive me. Because you'll understand what I sacrificed, what I asked others to sacrifice, and you'll realize your childhood was built on graves you never knew existed. Jacob's jaw tightened. Try me. I looked at my son, really looked, and saw for the first time that he wasn't asking for permission anymore. He was demanding the truth, whether I thought he could handle it or not.
I told Jacob everything in that hangar. Not the sanitized version, not the Hollywood version, the real one. Laos, Tehran, Bogota, Manila, the names, the faces, the people I'd saved and the ones I couldn't. The decisions made in rooms that didn't exist, orders that were never written down, operations that succeeded because no one knew they'd happened. By the time I finished, dawn was bleeding through the hangar's broken roof. Jacob sat on an oil drum, head in his hands. When he finally looked up, his eyes were different, older. Ashford, he said, why does he want you gone now, after all these years? Because I'm the last one who knows the truth about the Moscow directive. What truth? I pulled out my phone, opened an encrypted app that looked like a weather widget, but wasn't.
typed in a code I'd memorized in 1984 and never used. 30 seconds later, a file downloaded. The Moscow directive wasn't about stopping a mole, I said, showing Jacob the screen. It was about protecting one. Someone high up in Soviet intelligence who'd been feeding us information since the 70s. Someone so valuable that we built an entire network around keeping them hidden. Jacob scanned the document, his software engineering brain parsing the data faster than I could explain it. "Ashford," he whispered. "These clearances, these access codes, they all route back to William Ashford, 23 years old in 1979, junior analyst. Perfect position to pass information without suspicion." I took the phone back. He wasn't trying to stop Architect. He was trying to stop me from revealing that he was the original source, that the Moscow directive succeeded because Ashford betrayed his own government. "But he's the director now. He's spent 40 years climbing the ranks, making sure anyone who knew the truth either retired quietly or died conveniently. I'm the last one left, the last witness to his treason." Jacob stood, paced. "Then we go public. We expose him." "With what proof? Classified files I illegally accessed? Testimony from a 72-year-old ex-agent with no official record of service? They'd bury me in a psychiatric facility before I finished the first sentence." "Then what do we do?" I smiled, the same smile I'd given him 3 days ago when he'd threatened me with the nursing home. "We do what I've always done. We outplay him." It took 18 hours. Jacob turned out to be exactly what I needed, a digital native who understood networks I'd only ever manipulated through human assets. While I worked the old channels, encrypted calls to retired agents in Frankfurt and Singapore, coded messages sent through channels that officially didn't exist, Jacob worked the new ones. He traced Ashford's communications, found patterns in his secure emails, discovered that every consultation Ashford had requested over the past decade ended with the consultant disappearing. Not dying, not retiring, just vanishing into black sites and secure facilities where questions couldn't reach them. 12 people, all of them like me, last witnesses to operations Ashford needed buried. "He's not protecting the agency," Jacob said, staring at his laptop screen. "He's protecting himself." Now you're thinking like an operative. Together, we built a dead man switch. Files automatically distributed to 7 different journalists, 3 senators, and 2 foreign intelligence agencies, if I didn't check in every 72 hours. Everything. The Moscow directive, Ashford's treason, the 12 disappeared consultants. But we needed one more thing. Proof Ashford was actively trying to silence me. "So we give him the opportunity," I said. Jacob looked at me. "You want to let him try?" "I want to let him think he's succeeding." That night, I called Ashford, told him I'd reviewed the files, that I was ready for the Prague meeting, that I understood the risks and accepted them. "Good," Ashford said, relief evident in his voice. "Car picks you up tomorrow at dawn. I'll be ready." I hung up. Jacob was already packing his bag. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Coming with you." "No, too dangerous." "Dad," he stopped, met my eyes. And I saw it. Not the resentment anymore, not the confusion, something else. Something that looked almost like respect. "Let me spend one day protecting you." I wanted to argue, wanted to pull rank,
pull fatherhood, pull every card that said he should stay safe while I walked into danger. But I'd already stolen enough of his life with my secrets. "All right," I said, "but you follow my lead. Exactly." Deal. For the first time in 30 decades, Harrison and Jacob Whitmore weren't father and son. We were partners, and Ashford had no idea what was coming. The car came at dawn, just like Ashford promised. Black Lincoln, different driver, same purpose. Jacob and I were ready. We'd wired the house, 3 cameras, audio recording, all streaming live to secure servers Jacob had set up through his work contacts. When Ashford's men came through the door, not to escort me, but to secure me, every word, every action was captured. "Mr. Whitmore, we need you to come with us. Director's orders." "Am I under arrest?" "This is a matter of national security." "Then you'll have a warrant." The lead agent, young, efficient, probably didn't know who Ashford really was, reached for his weapon. That's when Jacob stepped out from the kitchen. He said, "I wouldn't, because right now 7 journalists, 3 senators, and the House Intelligence Committee are watching this live. Wave to the camera." The agent froze. "You're making a mistake," he said. "No," I replied. "Director Ashford made a mistake. 40 years ago. And then he made 12 more, one for each person he disappeared to cover it up." By noon, the files had leaked, not to the public. Some things are too dangerous for civilian consumption, but to the right people, the Inspector General, the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, allied intelligence agencies in Britain, Germany, and Israel, who'd been asking uncomfortable questions about disappeared assets for years. By evening, Ashford was in a conference room at Langley, facing questions he couldn't answer without incriminating himself. By midnight, he'd resigned. Health reasons, the official statement said. The truth would stay classified for another 50 years, maybe longer. But the people who needed to know knew. And the consultants who disappeared? 3 of them were located within a week, alive, relocated, free to come home if they wanted. 9 were already dead. Natural causes, the reports said. I didn't believe it. Neither did the investigators, but proving murder from beyond the grave is harder than preventing it in the first place. As for me, my name stayed buried. No headlines, no medal ceremony, no apology. Just a quiet phone call from the new acting director, a woman I'd worked with in '89, someone who remembered when integrity meant something. She said, "You're clear, Harrison. Officially retired. Pension restored, medical benefits active, and for what it's worth, thank you." For what? For remembering what we're supposed to be. She hung up. Jacob helped me pack 3 days later, not for a nursing home, not for a black site, for a cabin in Sisters, Oregon. Small, quiet, mountains close enough to feel but far enough to breathe. Margaret and I had talked about retiring there. Never got the chance. Now I would. Jacob folded one of my old shirts, the blue one I'd worn to his high school graduation, and set it in the suitcase. He said, "Why didn't you ever tell me? Not the classified stuff, just that you mattered, that what you did meant something." I sat on the edge of the bed, felt every one of my 72 years. I said, "Because I wanted you to be safe, not proud." He said, "I don't understand." I said, "Pride makes you visible, makes you a target. If you'd known what I was, what I'd done, you would have told someone, a girlfriend, a friend, maybe just let it slip at a party after too many drinks. And that slip would have gotten back to someone who'd use it against me, against you, against your mother." I picked up the photograph on the nightstand, Margaret, 30 years younger, smiling in our Portland garden. I continued, "Safety meant anonymity. It meant you growing up thinking your father was boring, unremarkable, a consultant who traveled too much and never did anything interesting. Because if you thought that, so would everyone else, and you'd be safe." Jacob sat beside me, shoulder to shoulder, the way we used to sit when he was small and I'd read him stories before bed, back when I was still pretending to be normal. He said,
I'm sorry I threatened you with the nursing home. I said, I'm sorry I let you think you needed to. We sat in silence. The house creaked around us. Mrs. Chen's lawnmower hummed next door. Portland continued being Portland. Ordinary, oblivious, safe. The cabin, Jacob said, finally. How far is it? 3 hours. Close enough to visit? I looked at him, saw the boy, saw the man, saw the bridge we'd finally built between who I was and who he'd needed me to be. I said, close enough. He smiled. Not the smile of someone who'd discovered a secret. The smile of a son who'd finally found his father. And maybe, after 30 years, that was enough.
The clock sat on the kitchen table, its brass face tarnished, its gears exposed like the skeleton of something that had forgotten how to live. I'd pulled it down from the mantel that morning. 3 years of dust came with it. Jacob sat across from me, coffee growing cold in his mug, watching as I laid out my tools. Tiny screwdrivers, tweezers, oil that smelled like machine shops and memory, the kind of precision work I used to do on dead drops and surveillance equipment, back when my hands didn't shake. "You know how to fix clocks?" he asked. "I know how to fix mechanisms. Clocks are just mechanisms that measure something we pretend to control." He smiled. "That's very philosophical for 7 a.m. I'm old. I'm allowed to be philosophical." I picked up the main gear, the one that the repairman had said was seized. Studied it in the morning light. Corrosion? Yes, but not terminal, just neglected. Sometimes things stop working not because they're broken, but because no one's paying attention anymore. I cleaned it, slowly, carefully, the way I'd been taught to clean a weapon in basic training 50 years ago. Attention to detail, respect for the tool, understanding that precision matters when lives depend on it. Except no lives depended on this clock. Just an old man's need to prove that broken things could be fixed. Jacob watched in silence. He'd taken the week off work, said he had vacation days he needed to use. We both knew that was a lie. He just wanted to be here, to see his father as something other than a mystery or a disappointment, to see him as human. I oiled the gears, reset the escapement, adjusted the pendulum weight. 45 minutes of work that would have taken a professional 20, but I wasn't in a hurry. When I wound the key and set the clock upright, neither of us breathed. Tick, tick, tick. The sound filled the kitchen. Real this time. Not phantom, not memory. The actual rhythm of time moving forward the way it was supposed to. Jacob exhaled. "You did it." "We'll see if it keeps time." I set it back on the mantel, adjusted it slightly. Sometimes things run for an hour and stop again. Sometimes they remember how to keep going. And sometimes, Jacob said quietly, they just needed someone to care enough to fix them. I looked at him, saw what he wasn't saying. We weren't just talking about the clock. We made breakfast together. Actual breakfast. Eggs, bacon, toast that wasn't burned, coffee fresh enough to taste like something other than regret. Margaret used to make breakfast every Sunday. Big spreads, pancakes and fruit, and the kind of meals that said family, even when I was barely there to be part of one. After she died, I'd stopped. Breakfast became coffee and silence. But this morning, with Jacob scrambling eggs and me burning bacon the way I always did, it felt like something was being rebuilt. Not what we'd lost, something new. Something that acknowledged the gaps instead of pretending they didn't exist. We ate at the table. No phones, no television, just the sound of forks on plates and the clock ticking in the background. Emily wants to bring Lily by this weekend, if that's okay. Lily, my granddaughter, 8 years old. Last time I'd seen her was Christmas 2 years ago. She'd been polite, distant, the way kids are with relatives they don't really know. I'd like that. She's been asking questions about where Grandpa worked, what he did. What did you tell her? That you helped people, that sometimes helping people means you can't talk about it, and that it's okay to be proud of someone even if you don't understand everything they've done. My throat tightened. That's a good answer. Learned it from a good teacher. Eventually. The doorbell rang. We both tensed. Old habits. Visitors in my world used to mean either good news from people who couldn't use phones or bad news from people who didn't need to. But this was different. A courier. Official envelope. Department of Defense seal. I signed for it, brought it inside, opened it at the table while Jacob watched. 2 items. First, a pension reinstatement letter. Full benefits. Backdated to my retirement in 1995. The lump sum payment for 30 years of consulting services was enough to make Jacob's eyes widen. Dad! Don't, I said quietly. It's just money that should have paid all along. Second, a small wooden box. Inside, a medal. Silver. Simple. No ribbon. No certificate. Just an inscription on the back. For services unspoken. H.W. 1973 to 1995. No ceremony, no handshake from a president, no parade. Just acknowledgement from people who knew, from the only audience that mattered. Jacob picked it up, turned it over in his hands. Will you tell me about them? The operations? The people you saved? Not the classified parts, just the parts you can share. I looked at the medal, at my son, at the clock ticking on the mantel. Steady now, keeping time the way it was meant to. Yeah, I'll tell you. And for the first time in 30 years, I did. We sat at that table until the afternoon sun slanted through the windows. I told him about the translator in Laos, who became a school teacher in Sacramento, about the officer in Tehran whose grandchildren were now doctors in Maryland, about the journalist in Bogota who wrote stories that changed laws and saved lives. I told him about the people whose names he'd never know, but whose lives touched his in ways he'd never realize. And he listened. Not with judgment, not with resentment, with something that looked a lot like pride. Behind us, the clock kept ticking. Real, steady, moving forward, the way time does when you finally stop running from it. Tick, tick, tick.
So, here's my question for you. Was I right to handle it this way? Tell me in the comments below, what would you have done in my position? If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more real-life tales, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one. Because trust me, there's so much more on this channel. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next life story.